What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to unit number 6. This is the modern era, part 1 on the world wars. And this is section B on World War I outcomes. In the previous video, we talked about all of the causes and kind of the fighting in World War I. Today, we're going to kind of get into the outcomes, a couple things that happened towards the end of the war that kind of changed the tide, and then what happens as a result of the war. Some people consider this war a turning point in kind of global, or in this case, world history, and what's going on is going to kind of shape what we see post-World War I, and it's a huge difference from what we see before World War I. So let's get into some of this stuff. So first thing about this war. So this war is going to last from 1914 until 1918, and the treaty signed to end this war in 1919. So we really have 4 or 5 years of fighting. While the fighting's going on, so we have the soldiers actually fighting on the Western Front and the Eastern Front in these horrible, awful conditions. But the one thing that's different about this war from a lot of wars that we've seen in the past is this is really considered to be a total war. And by total war, when you see that term, and it probably will come up on a test or an exam or the AP World actual test, that this is going to be where everybody in a country are expected to actively participate. And when I say actively participate, I don't mean in the fighting. I mean civilians who are at home are expected to assist in the war effort in a variety of different ways, things that maybe they weren't expected to do in past wars and now they are. And this is a little different than what we see in like the recent wars, whether it's something that the United States fought in like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is where if you are at home, you're expected to make sacrifices for those fighting on the front. So for example, a lot of people who are living at home are expected to not buy as much food as they would have in the past. You can kind of see this is save the wheat, help the fleet, eat less bread. So at home, the goal is if you eat less bread and you kind of limit your food intake at home, there will be more food for those who are fighting in the war. And we need to make sure our soldiers are well fed in order to win this war. Also, we're going to see the start of rationing, and we see this as well in World War II, where you can only buy a certain amount of food. So in this case, this is a U.S. ad that says you can only have 2 pounds of sugar per month, and that's a ration. A ration is when you are given a specific amount that you can have over a certain period of time, whether in this case it's food. Later on, in the late 20th century, we'll see some countries have to limit their gas intake, how much gas you can actually have for your vehicle. So we're going to ration out food source. We're going to see this, like I said, in World War II as well. Also, women are going to be asked to work in the factories. So a lot of men are going off to war. So if the job entailed male labor force, women are going to be asked to come in and take over those jobs until the men return. So we have a lot of women working in this heavy, remember the Second Industrial Revolution is about heavy industry, and a lot of men worked in like these steel and iron factories. So women are going to be asked to step in and take over this role. You can imagine if you're a woman working in these factories, it's very empowering. Also, you're left at home to take care of the finances and the family, and you're working. So there's a lot going on that after this war is over, many women in these Western countries, and this is one of the impacts of this war, are going to kind of say, hey, we did a lot for this war effort. We didn't fight on the fronts, but we did a lot. Why don't we have the right to vote to elect our leaders? So we're going to see this female suffrage kind of take off even more so as a continuation from the last period, but women are going to get suffrage in a lot of Western countries during this time period. So that's the idea of total war. In terms of the fighting, by 1914, we really see 2 changes that are going to take place in the war that are really going to change the dynamic of the war. So number one, Russia, who I mentioned in the last video, is really struggling in this war, and their only thing that they have in this war is people. They have a large population, so people keep getting sent to fight, and soldiers keep dying because they're not industrialized. They don't have the modern weaponry or modern clothing for the factories that produce clothes. So a lot of people are dying in this war, whether it's from the elements, from the cold winters or the geography of Russia, or they're dying just because the Germans have such better military technology. So as a result of this, Russia leaves the war. And when they leave the war, they give up land to Germany. So Germany gets these 2 huge tracts of land. And so Russia, and we'll come back to this, when Russia leaves the war, they're going to go through a revolution, which is a communist revolution. And we will come back to this because it's too complicated to get into here. So I just want to point out here, like put a little star if you're taking notes, that we're going to come back to this. This is a part where there's a communist revolution led by a guy named Vladimir Lenin, and it's called the Bolshevik Revolution. So we'll get back to this, but Germany has been fighting on 2 fronts. They've been fighting here and over here against Russia. So Germany and Austria-Hungary are able to move all of their soldiers to one side. So we're basically going to double the force of the German and Austro-Hungarians on the Western Front. You'd think that this would be the be-all, end-all. Like this is, if you were making a prediction right here, you'd say there is no doubt the Germans are going to win. But what occurs at the same time is the U.S. declares war on Germany. And when the U.S. declares war on Germany, it's really for two reasons. One, there's the sinking of this ship called the Lusitania. It's not a U.S. ship, it's a British ship, but it does have U.S. passengers on it. And the Germans are practicing something called, and you might have learned about this in U.S. history in the past, unrestricted submarine warfare. Basically, the Germans say if any ship, whether it has American passengers or not, is coming towards the British coast, we're shooting it down. We're going to shoot torpedoes at it and capsize the ship. The reason why Germans say this is because the U.S. are being suspected of shipping weapons to Britain on a lot of passenger ships. And they are. It's no doubt about it. But when this happens in the sinking of Lusitania, there are children who are going to be on the ship, some American, and it is seen as this act of war against U.S. Also, Germany sends a telegram to Mexico. It's called the Zimmerman telegram because the guy who wrote it in Germany his name was Zimmerman. And it's a message from Germany to Mexico asking Mexico to declare war on the United States if the U.S. declares war on Germany. So basically it says it asks Mexico to be an ally with Germany. Mexico doesn't even really get there. Mexico's like, we don't want anything to do with this, but the U.S. intercepts this telegram or telegraph cable, and they translate after deciphering the code, and they realize what it says. So because of these two things, the U.S. declares war on Germany. So what happens is, even though the Russian soldiers or the German soldiers are all moving to the Western Front, the U.S. comes in, and the U.S. is like the sixth man off the bench, or that guy who comes in the 80th minute of a soccer match who is just like ready to go. So we have all these people in the trenches who've been fighting for 4 years, and the U.S. is like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And as a result, the U.S. is going to really help turn the tide of this war, where they are able to come in fresh, the excitement, and they assist in winning this war for the Allies. So as a result of all this, the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Germany are all going to weaken. And on November 11th, 1918, Germany, the last Central Power, actually surrenders. And 11/11 is still signified today by Veterans Day, which used to be called Armistice Day, to signify the end of this world war. The winners here, Britain, France, US, Italy, and Japan. Generally, these people want more money. They want money, they want land, they want punishment. They feel like they won, and that these losers over here need to be punished for the war. Generally, to the victor goes the spoils, is the old saying. So it's because they won, they believe that they should get something as a result of this. Also, I just want to point out all of these places are going to have their colonies also help fight, and they promise their colonies independence. So the question is going to be, now the war's over, we won, do we get our independence? So there's a lot of questions to be answered here. So I want to go over a couple of these outcomes, and these outcomes are going to continue into the next couple of videos that we do. But a couple of outcomes that are really important. One, I just want to point out the casualties. These are people who are dead or who died during the war or were wounded. And if you look at these numbers, they are outrageously high. More people died in this war than every other war, almost every other war combined in human history. So it's an amazing amount of casualties. 9 million in Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, France, Britain, Italy, Turkey is 1 million, or the Ottoman Empire. And then the U.S. is way down here just at the bottom. And the reason why they're so small is because we didn't come into the war until 1917, when there's only really a year left in the war. So this whole chart kind of signifies how many people died. And you can imagine the outrage if you're a French person, you've won the war, but you've lost family members, or your brother comes home injured from the war. Your outrage is towards the Germans. So there's a lot of anger going into this treaty, which is called the Treaty of Versailles, towards the Germans. And it's called the Treaty of Versailles because the meeting actually takes place in France at the Palace of Versailles. This is considered to be the war to end all wars. They really believe that as a result of this treaty, there will never again be war in the entire world, which, as we know, war is going to come 20 years later in World War II, but they think this at the time. And there's three really big things that we're going to focus on here. One, they're going to punish Germany. Germany is forced to accept responsibility for the war. They have to actually sign a piece of paper that says, we are fully responsible for every single thing that's happened during this war. We're responsible for the deaths, the money spent, the lives lost, everything, injuries, all of it we're responsible for. That's a huge thing. This is called the War Guilt Clause. They are guilty of the war. Even though they didn't necessarily start it, they have to take responsibility. And if they don't take responsibility, the countries will come in and invade them again. Also, they have to pay reparations. Reparations is a fancy term that just means to pay back for some injustice. So in this case, they're forced to pay, modern day terms, about $33 billion to the winners. It's scheduled over multiple years, but that's the amount of money. Also, they lose all of their colonies in Africa, Southeast Asia. All their imperialist colonies get taken away. And they're basically going to go to the British and the French. Also, they're forced to reduce their military, and they actually lose land as well in their own country. So they lose land here along the coast on the border with France, as well as this land that was taken away. And as a result of the treaty with Russia, they take that back. So we're destroying Germany here. Number two, we create an organization called the League of Nations, which is going to be very weak. It's an organization that meets between all the countries. Each country sends a representative. And the idea is, instead of fighting about things as they escalate, let's talk about our problems, let's work them out, and let's see what happens. This is actually the brainchild of the U.S. President, Woodrow Wilson. It's part of his what's called 14 points, which is more of a U.S. thing to worry about. But the problem with this treaty is that a lot of people aren't going to, the League of Nations, that a lot of people aren't going to join. Some countries are told you can't join. So Russia's told you can't join, Germany's told you can't join at first, and then they leave pretty early. The U.S. doesn't join, even though it's the brainchild of the president, because Congress doesn't approve it, which is a whole separation of powers and an issue. But a lot of countries just don't even participate. So it's hard to be a productive peacekeeping organization if not everyone is participating in it, especially major countries. And third, probably the biggest thing that comes out of this is nationalism. A bunch of new countries are created after World War I. We're going to break up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this is 1914, before World War I. This is Austro-Hungarian Empire. We break it up into a bunch of little smaller countries. So we break it up into Austria, Hungary, this country Czechoslovakia here, and Yugoslavia. So we're basically giving people who are Slavic, who are not Austrian or Hungarian, their own country. So that's a big piece of this. We're going to break it up so you can see these huge changes here. This is a perfect map to use on like an AP exam. So you can see the changes here and here as a result of signing the Treaty of Versailles. The second thing is we're also going to break up the Ottoman Empire. Remember, they were weak. They tried to do those Tanzimat reforms in the last time period. This is synthesis, by the way. And we had this old versus new. The new was the Young Turks. And we have this split between two groups. Well, the Ottoman Empire, after losing this war, is going to be broken up. Part of the Ottoman Empire becomes Turkey. That's going to be run by the Young Turks. They're going to institute a lot of democracy, kind of bringing back those Tanzimat reforms again. The rest of the Ottoman Empire is going to be split up. And these are areas that you've heard of probably in the news: Iraq, up here into Syria, Palestine, which is now called Israel. These areas are going to be run by the British and the French. They basically take them over as colonies, but they're called mandates. And they say, we'll give you your independence when we feel you are ready for your independence, but you're not quite there yet, but we'll eventually give it to you, these areas in the Ottoman Empire. Last but not least, there's two big problems with this treaty going forward, and I want you to keep this in your mind as we go forward into World War II. One, Japan and Italy were promised land in this treaty, and they didn't get it. So two allies who joined late are mad at this treaty, and they're angry at the signing. The third country is Germany. Germany's upset, and I don't want to give it away. Don't tell anybody, but here's the spoiler alert. These three countries, angry at the Treaty of Versailles, are going to join together in World War II. They're on the Axis powers. Last thing, and this is really this one, remember this one, don't forget this one. This is like the key to all of this moving forward, especially after we get through the world wars. This is going to lead to a huge rise in nationalism in the colonies. The colonies were promised their independence. The war ends. Places like India say, where's our independence? And the British say, you're not ready yet. When you're ready, we'll give it to you, but we can't give you your independence yet. So we see this rise of nationalism of these colonies who say, we fought for you. We had soldiers who died in this war. You said we were going to get our independence, and we didn't. And that's not right. So this nationalism rises, and by nationalism, I mean they're going to start demanding an increased demand for their independence. And a lot of these countries are not going to get it, so they're going to continue to push for this in between World War I and World War II. Also, we're going to see the splitting up of Germany. So now, gents, which portion am I going to carve for you? This is supposed to be Japan. They're being fed the peace terms of the Treaty of Versailles unhappily. So this is what we're working with as we go into the period in between World War I and World War II. We got anger, all kinds of issues. That's what I got. As always, questions, comments, please let me know. Have a good day.